If you are settling yourself now and letting the last of the day drift away, you are very welcome here beside me. You do not have to do anything clever or special. You do not have to hold yourself a certain way. Just let your body find its own comfort, the way a boat finds the level of the water beneath it. You can loosen your jaw, soften your shoulders, and let the weight of your thoughts ease down, as if they are stones you have carried long enough, and you are setting them gently by the shore. You are here to rest, and I am here to tell you a story. That is enough. If you find yourself enjoying this time, if the sound of my voice and the shape of these old Irish stories help you drift more easily into sleep, you might remember to come back another night and to subscribe to Celtic Slumber, where there will be more soft wanderings through the old tales. But you do not have to think about that now. There is nowhere you need to be except here, with your breath moving in and out, like a tide that has known you since before you were born. Tonight, I will tell you my story. My name is Fionnuala. Perhaps you have heard a little about me, though maybe only in the shadowed, half-remembered way that old stories sometimes reach people. They say I was turned into a swan, that I spent long years on wild waters. That is true enough, though the truth of it is quieter than the way it is sometimes told. In the simplest way, I was a daughter who loved her father, a sister who loved her brothers, and a soul who learned that time can change almost everything, except the deepest kind of love. You do not have to hold on to the details. Let them come and go in your mind the way clouds pass over a hill. If they fade as you grow drowsy, that is fine. I will keep the thread of the story for you. You can lie back and let it move around you like a slow, clear river. I remember the hall of my father, Lear, as if I had walked through it only yesterday. There was a long strip of light that grew across the stone floor as the sun moved, and as a child, I used to follow that light, hopping from bright patch to bright patch, pretending that the spaces in between were deep lakes or shadowed forests that I must not touch. The air smelled of peat smoke and wool, and sometimes of the sea when the wind was in a certain mood. Our house stood close enough to the water that, on still evenings, you could hear the lazy slap of small waves on the shore, almost like a slow clap of approval as the day ended. My brothers filled that hall with noise. A, the eldest of the boys, had a laugh that bounced off the rafters and made the dogs lift their heads. Fiacra was quieter, but quick, with a mind that loved puzzles, knots in rope, knots in riddles, knots in anything he could tease apart. And little Con, who always seemed to be running, even when he was sitting down. There was a restlessness in his legs, as if some secret drumbeat only he could hear was urging him on. I was the eldest of us all, and in those early days, I felt that as a warm kind of weight. I liked to plait my brothers' hair and straighten their tunics and scold them gently when they charged in with muddy feet. They teased me for it, of course, but it was fond teasing. And when they were tired or scraped or frightened by some loud noise in the night, it was my bed they climbed into, tangling their cold toes against my shins and stealing my blankets. The seasons turned in a soft, steady way then. The winters were long and dark, but inside the hall, the fire painted everything in golds and reds. My father was a tall man, broad in the shoulders, with a voice that could be fierce in battle and yet gentle at home. He would lift us up like sacks of grain and toss us laughing, and when he came back from journeys, his cloak would smell of rain and horses, and the sharp air of distant places. I remember his hands most clearly. They were big and sometimes rough, but when he rested one on my head in passing, I felt as if the whole world had chosen that moment to say, "Well done, little one, I see you." On the nights when the wind blew hard and the shutters rattled, he would sit by the hearth and tell us stories of the old times, tales of gods and spirits, of warriors and queens, of lakes that held silver fish who were really enchanted people, of hills that were hollow and full of music. I listened with my whole body, and I suppose it is no wonder that my life itself became a tale told by fireside. I did not know that then, of course. I only knew the warmth of my brothers at my sides, the flicker of light on my father's face, and the safe weight of the roof over our heads. It is a strange thing, looking back, how the mind remembers the feel of peace, not as sharp, not as dramatic as sorrow, but as a kind of evenness. Those days lie in my memory, like a still lake under a clear sky. Sometimes, when the noise of later events presses too hard, I return to that lake and rest upon it in my thoughts. If you like, you can rest there with me now for a little while. Imagine the quiet of a wide, calm water, the soft lap of small waves on the shore, the smell of wet stones and early morning. Let yourself float there behind your closed eyes, knowing that nothing is required of you. Into that peaceful time, change came, as it always does. My mother died when I was still quite young. I will not dwell on that part. You know enough of loss from your own life, I have no doubt, and there is no need for me to press on that bruise in your heart. I will only say that the day she left us, a hollow opened in the air around my father. It was as if the world had been a circle and now a wedge was missing. He did his best not to let us see it, but from my place near his side, I caught the way his eyes sometimes went far away, even when he was right there in the room with us. Time passed. Wounds crossed over, even if they never fully close. The hall was not as loud as it had been, but there was still laughter, still the business of daily life, the mending of clothes, the stirring of pots, the training in weaponry for my brothers, the learning of songs and stories for me. Yet underneath it all there was a sense, like the first thin ice on a puddle, that something delicate and cold was forming. My father's allies and kin urged him to remarry. They thought a new wife would bring warmth back into the house, would give us a mother's care, would strengthen ties between families. And so, for many reasons, my father agreed. Her name was Aoife. I will tell you now, I do not see her as a monster. It would be easy and perhaps satisfying to cast her in that shape, to point to her and say, "Here is the dark figure who came in and broke everything." But time has shaded my view. I look back and I see a young woman who was trying to fit herself into a place that still smelled of another's perfume. That is not an excuse for what she did, but it is a context, and sometimes that softens the edges of judgment. I remember the first evening she arrived. The hall had been swept, the best tapestries hung, the fire built high. My father had dressed in his finest cloak, the one with the silver clasp, and we children had been brushed and tidied within an inch of our lives. When Aoife stepped in from the fading light, she carried with her the scent of travel, of horses and cold air, and a faint lingering of some herb. I did not know. She was beautiful in a way that was a little hard, the way a bright jewel can be hard. Her hair fell in dark, shining waves over her shoulders, and her eyes moved quickly, taking in the room, the people, the shadows. I went to her with a small knot of worry in my stomach. Would she like us? Would she want us? Would we be too loud or too quiet or too much in the way children notice such things, even if no one tells them to? I offered her a cup of ale with both hands, the way I had been taught, and I remember that she smiled. For a moment it was a genuine smile, softening her whole face, and she thanked me. Her voice was low and pleasant to hear. I felt a little easier then. At first, life did indeed feel warmer. Aoife was kind in the beginning. She sat with me by the fire and asked about my mother, but gently, and when my voice caught, she rested her hand over mine and did not push. She praised my brothers for their skills, even when they were still clumsy, and she laughed at their jokes in a way that seemed, then, entirely real. My father looked at her with the hopeful, careful gaze of a man who is not sure if happiness will come back, and he was grateful for every scrap of light she seemed to bring. But people are rarely just one thing. Under the kindness, there was something strained in Aoife. I would see it in the way her shoulders stiffened when my father's eyes strayed to the space where my mother's harp still hung, unused, on the wall, or the way her hand tightened around the rim of her cup when visitors spoke of the love Lear had borne his first wife. It is hard, I suppose, to come second to a ghost. No matter how kind the living are, the dead are often remembered at their best, their sharp edges blurred by time. I did not understand all this when I was young, but I sensed the unease, the pressure building like a storm far out at sea. My brothers continued to be themselves, as boys do. They were noisy, affectionate, always half tumbling into whatever room they entered. A would lean his head on our father's shoulder and speak to him in a familiar, easy way. Con would pull at his cloak and beg him to come and see the new fort they had built from fallen branches. Fiacra would ask for his advice on a puzzle or a carving. To them, our father was the sun around which their days turned. They did not see how that sun might feel to someone trying to plant her own small flame in the same sky. Little by little, the warmth between Aoife and us cooled. It was not that she became openly cruel, not at first. It was more a withdrawing, a slight hesitation before her hand touched our hair, a certain tightness around her mouth when we clambered onto our father's lap. She began to plead sickness more often, staying in her chamber when we went out with our father to feasts or hunts. When she did come, her smile was fixed, as if painted on. I remember one afternoon, very clearly. The hall was quiet, most of the household gone about their tasks. I had settled by the window with some embroidery, though, to be truthful, I was more interested in watching the light play on the dust motes than in the neatness of my stitches. Aoife came in, moving more softly than usual, and sat opposite me. For a while we were both silent, and the only sounds were the occasional crack from the cooling hearth and the faint call of a bird outside. Then she asked, in a very calm voice, whether I thought my father loved us more than he loved her. I was startled, and I looked up quickly. Her eyes were on her own hands, which were folded in her lap, the knuckles pale where she held them too tightly together. I did not know what to say. I was a girl, still more child than woman, and I had never been asked to weigh love on such a scale. I said the first thing that came to me, which was that love was not a loaf of bread to be cut into pieces and counted. I said that my father loved us as his children, and he loved her as his wife, and that I did not see how those things had to fight each other. She did not answer for a long time. Then she lifted her gaze and looked straight at me, and in her eyes there was such a depth of hurt that for a moment I lost my breath. It was as if she were standing on a small island with the tide rising all around her, and she did not know whether to shout for help or to brace herself and pretend she liked the water. "You speak very wisely for one so young," she said at last. "But the world is not as simple as you think. You and your brothers are like vines around his heart. There is not much room left for anything else." I wanted to protest, but something in her expression stopped me. I sat quietly instead, my needle forgotten in my hand, and after a moment she rose and left the room without another word. The air felt colder after she was gone. If you are listening to this as you rest, you might notice your own thoughts wandering now and then, perhaps to people who have come into your life and felt out of place, or to times when you yourself have felt like an extra piece at a table already set. If such memories arise, you do not need to fight them. Let them drift through and away again, like leaves on a slow-moving river. You are just listening. You are safe where you are. The change in Aoife did not happen all at once, any more than the change of season from summer to winter does. They were small signs. She began to suggest that we spent too much time near our father, that we tired him, that we should be more independent. She asked that we spend more hours at our lessons, more time away from the hall, more days out on the land with our tutors and attendants. Some of this was not unreasonable, and my father, wanting harmony, agreed. We did not see as much of him as before, but he would still seek us out when he could, sitting on the edge of our beds at night, brushing the hair from our faces, asking about our days. Yet Aoife watched. That is what I remember most. She watched us with a gaze that felt weighing. When my father laughed at something Con did, her lips tightened. When I placed my hand in his arm to walk beside him at a feast, I felt her eyes on my fingers. It was not that she never smiled. She did, but the smiles grew sharper, thinner, like ice along the edge of a stream. There came a time then when she went to my father and said that she wished to take us to visit her own kin for a while, to draw us all closer, to help us know the other side of our family better. It sounded reasonable enough. My father, though he hesitated, agreed. He loved us and he trusted her. He believed, I think, that if she spent more time with us away from the constant reminder of his first marriage, she might find her own place more easily. I was not sure. There was a queasiness in my belly that I could not explain, a small shiver that ran along my spine whenever I thought of leaving home under her care. Still, I said nothing. I did not want to cause discord. I told myself I was being foolish, that my unease was just a reluctance to leave my father and the familiar walls of our hall. We set out on a bright morning. The sky was a pale blue, washed clean by rain the night before. The grass along the path was still beaded with droplets that sparkled as if someone had scattered silver coins among the blades Oif rode at the head of our small company, straight-backed on her horse. I rode beside my brothers, keeping an eye on little Con, who was still young enough to let his mount wander if he got distracted. We did not travel far that first day, stopping by a lake that sat in a hollow of land, like a mirror held in cupped hands. The water was calm, touched only now and then by the small circles where fish rose to taste the world above. Reeds stood tall at the edges, whispering in the faintest breeze. It was a beautiful place, and under other circumstances, I might have felt only peace there. Aoife suggested that we bathe to wash away the dust of travel and refresh ourselves. There was a brightness in her manner that day that felt a little too bright, like a smile held too long. Still, the idea of the cool water was pleasant, and we were children used to trusting the adults around us. We slipped from our clothes and waded into the lake, laughing when Con splashed us, squealing when the chill first caught at our ankles. As I moved deeper, the water closed around my legs, my waist climbing toward my shoulders. The world above the surface grew distant, muffled. I heard Aoif's voice, low and strange, speaking words I did not understand. I turned my head, drops of water trickling from my hair into my eyes, and saw her standing on the shore with her arms lifted, her eyes dark with something I could not read. The reeds shivered, though no wind touched them. The sky seemed to dimple, as if it too were water. Then the change came. It did not feel like fire, or tearing, or the breaking of bones, as some later tellers of the tale like to describe it. For me, it felt like slipping, as if I had been wearing a heavy cloak for so long that I had forgotten its weight, and now someone gently unclasped it and let it fall away. My limbs, a moment before solid and familiar, grew light and strange. My fingers vanished from my sight, feathered wings unfurling where they had been. My throat tightened, then opened in a new way, and the sound that rose from me was no longer the cry of a girl, but the call of a swan. For a heartbeat, terror flared in me. I did not understand what had happened. I tried to stand and could not. I tried to speak my brothers' names, and only a low, echoing note came out. I beat my wings against the water, floundering, droplets flying in frantic arcs. Then I heard my brothers. They were calling too. Their voices changed as mine was, but still theirs in some deep frequency that my heart knew. I turned, flapping clumsily, and saw them, 3 white shapes on the water, their necks long and curved, their eyes wide and wild. Swan bodies, but the souls of the boys I loved shining through. I swam to them at once, the instinct so strong it drowned the panic. As I moved, the new body began to make more sense. The water that had felt like an enemy a moment before now held me up, cradling me. My wings, instead of flailing, cut through it cleanly when I let go of fear and followed the motion they wanted to make. I drew close to my brothers and wrapped my neck over Con's in a clumsy, desperate embrace. He pressed his head against mine with a shudder that rippled down his body. Fionnuala, he tried to say, but it came out as a sound more music than word. Still, I understood. I am here, I told him, though what rose from my new throat was only a soft, low call. I am here. I will not leave you. We gathered together like that in the shallows, the 4 of us, our bodies altered, but our closeness unchanged. I could feel their hearts beating where our sides touched. I could feel their fear, yes, but also their trust in me. It steadied me, the way a hand on your back can steady you when the world pitches. On the shore, Aoife watched us. For a moment, there was triumph on her face, a terrible, brittle joy. She had done it. She had taken my father's children and changed them into something else, something that, in her mind, would no longer stand between him and her. But as she looked at us, that expression shifted. Perhaps she had not quite imagined what it would be like to see 4 children turned into swans, and yet still hear their cries, still see their terror, their clinging to each other. A kind of horror came over her then, and beneath it, to my surprise, sorrow. She fell to her knees at the water's edge, her fine clothes soaking up the damp. Her voice shook as she spoke the shape of the curse, binding it to us more firmly, even as her own heart seemed to twist. "You will be swans," she said, "for 3 times 300 years. 300 on this lake, 300 on the northern seas, 300 on the western waters, until a new bell sounds in this land, and a faith not yet born reaches these shores. Only then will the spell release you." She cried as she said it, real tears falling down her cheeks, shining in the pale light. Her hands trembled. I believe now that part of her wanted to take it back, to swallow the words, to turn time to the point just before she spoke them. But that is not how magic works, nor how choices work, often enough. Once you fling a stone into a still pool, the ripples go on whether you meant them or not. I looked at her from my place in the water. I felt anger, yes, and hurt, but under that there was a strange, deep pity. She had bound us, but she had bound herself too, in a different way, to guilt, to regret, to the knowledge of what she had done. I could see it sitting on her shoulders already, heavier than any cloak. Aoife turned and fled then, her skirts dragging. Our attendants, who had seen nothing clearly, only a strange disturbance on the water and the cries of swans, ran after her, confused and frightened. In a short time, we were alone on the lake, 4 white shapes drifting near the reeds. The sky lowered itself slowly toward evening. The first stars pricked through the fading blue. The air grew cooler, but our new feathers kept the chill from our skin. The water, which I had feared at first, cradled us. My brothers huddled close around me, their bodies pressing against mine. "What will we do?" A asked, his voice hollow with shock. "We will stay together," I said. That much, at least, I knew. We will stay together, here on this lake, until our father finds us. He will find us, he must. I believed that, then, with all my heart. I did not yet understand how long 300 years can be, or how grief and confusion can make even the bravest of men falter. All I knew was that my father loved us, that love had always been the fixed point in my sky, and that everything in me insisted he would come. The night deepened. The world grew quiet, except for the soft sounds of water and the distant call of other birds. We tucked our heads against our wings, exhausted more in spirit than in body. Above us, The stars wheeled slowly, uncaring and constant. If you are lying in the dark now, listening with your own eyes closed, you might feel some of that stillness. You do not need to picture every detail. Just imagine the gentle rocking of water beneath you, the steady presence of those you love near at hand, the sky stretching overhead like a blanket. Your breath can move in time with the slow lift and fall of small waves. In the days that followed, we began to learn what it meant to live as swans. At first, every movement felt strange. Walking on the shore with webbed feet instead of running on bare toes, dipping our new beaks into the water to find food instead of reaching with hands. But bodies are adaptable things, and so are spirits. Children, especially, can bend further than they think without breaking. We discovered that we could skim along the surface of the lake with a grace we had never had on land. We found that our eyes could see far across the water, catching the gleam of fish deep below, the flash of sunlight on distant ripples. We spoke to each other constantly, practicing the weaving of meaning into the new notes our throats could make, until our calls and songs became a language only we fully understood. When we were tired or afraid, we would curl close together in the reeds, and I would tell stories, my voice a mixture of human memory and swan music, shaping tales my father had once told us into something that floated on the air in long, soothing lines. Sometimes, when the wind was right, we heard the sounds of our old home carried faintly to us. The echo of a horn, the murmur of many voices. Once, the clear, shattered cry of my father when he came to the lake and realized what had happened. He knew us by our voices, by the way we came to him, but he could not undo the spell. He stayed with us as long as he could, calling to us, weeping, promising that he would return, that he would never forget us. And he did return many times over the course of his life. Each visit carved another line of grief and love into his face. Each parting left my brothers quieter for a while. Soon enough, though, his footsteps on the shore grew less frequent. Not because his love faded, but because time presses on even those who are most determined to resist it. His body aged, his duties weighed on him. The world beyond our lake tugged at his attention. There were wars, alliances, other children, other demands, all of it swirling around him like leaves in a strong wind. He came when he could. When he did, we swam to him, brushing our wings against his hands, resting our heads against his knees. He would talk then of small things, of news from distant places, of crops and weather, and the sentiments of chieftains' ordinary talk, threaded with the extraordinary fact of what we were. One day, he did not come again. We waited for him, that first year, watching the shore, listening for the sound of his horn, the tread of his feet. The seasons turned, the reeds yellowed and bent, the first ice formed at the edges of the water. The air grew sharp enough to make our breath visible. Still, we waited. In time, it became clear that he was gone from the world, his story having run its course. My brothers grieved in their own ways. I grew restless, circling and calling, as if he could raise the departed with the force of his longing. Fiacre grew more withdrawn, spending hours alone on a quiet curve of the lake. Staring at nothing in particular, his thoughts turned inward. Con clung to me more fiercely. His young heart wounded in a way that had no simple balm. I felt my own grief, like a stone in my chest, heavy and unmoving. Yet even as I mourned, something in me knew that this too was part of the long, honest shape of life. Parents are not meant to outlive their children, perhaps, but neither are they guaranteed to stand beside them forever. There are many ways in which we are left. Some are sudden, some are slow, some are kind, some are cruel. The leaving is real in all of them. But love is also real, and it does not entirely vanish when the body that first carried it falls into the earth. It changes form, the way water changes to mist or ice, but its essence remains. I felt my father's love in the way I could still call his stories to mind and share them with my brothers. I felt it in the courage that rose in me when I wanted to despair and yet did not. I felt it in the way I could look at the lake that held us and see not only a prison, but a home, however strange. We settled into the long rhythm of our years on that water. Dawn would come, grey at first, and then slowly flushed with pink and gold. We would stretch our wings, shake the droplets from our feathers, and glide out into the open surface. Some days were bright and full of easy movement, fish plentiful, the air soft against our bodies. Other days were harder, the sky low and heavy with clouds, the wind pushing rough hands against us, the water stirred into small, choppy waves. On those days, we would stay closer to the reeds, to each other, riding out the unrest. Time blurred, the human way of counting, of marking each year with some event, slipped from us. Instead, we knew the turning by the habits of the creatures around us, the first return of certain birds, the length of shadow in summer evenings, the thickness of ice that formed each winter. We watched generations of fish rise and vanish, of animals come to the shore to drink, and then come no more. Sometimes we saw people we did not recognize, standing where my father once stood, looking at us with wonder, pointing, telling each other the now legendary tale of the children of Lear. It was a strange thing to be both oneself and one's own story at the same time. If you are still awake as I speak, notice how the idea of time can loosen in your body right now. You do not need to count minutes or think about tomorrow. Let time be like the lake, a broad, quiet thing you are simply floating upon. Your breath can keep you company, in and out, like the gentle rise and fall of our swan bodies on the surface of the water. It may sound lonely to you, all those years on the lake. Sometimes it was. There were nights when the sky felt very large, and for a moment I would remember what it had been like to have a roof over my head, walls around me, the murmur of human voices in the next room. I would feel a pang then, sharp enough to bring a small, wordless cry to my throat. But there was beauty too, a beauty that sank into us, slowly, patiently. The moon laying a silver path across the dark water. The way mist curled along the surface in early morning, softening the edges of everything, making the world look as if it had been drawn with the gentlest lines. The sense of belonging to the place, of knowing its moods, its smells, its sounds, more intimately than I had ever known any one room or field in my human life. Most of all, there was my brothers, always my brothers. The love between us did not fade. If anything, it deepened, thickened, like a stew left to simmer for hours. We quarrelled sometimes, as siblings do. I would become impatient with Fiacra's quietness. Con would push too far, daring the edges of the lake, and I would scold him. But underneath every small clash, there was the knowledge that we were all each other had, and that we would rather cut off our own feathers than truly hurt one another. I became for them what I had always been, but more so. A centre, a guide, a comfort. Not because I was wiser or better, but because someone had to hold that role and I was the eldest, and love had made my spine strong. I sang to them on frightening nights. I nudged them gently back from dangerous currents. I reminded them of our father's face when it began to blur in our minds, of our mother's voice when it began to fade. I kept the stories alive, weaving them into new shapes that could be carried on the air. Years passed like this. 300 of them, or so the spell had ordained, though, to us, they were more a feeling than a number. When the time came that the curse shifted, when we were called away from our familiar lake toward the harsher waters of the north, it felt less like a sudden command and more like a tide changing. Slow, but irresistible. That, though, is a part of the story I will move into in a moment. For now, if your eyes are heavy, if your breath has grown deeper, you may let yourself drift on the image of a quiet lake at dusk, 4 white shapes close together, not afraid, the sky dimming, the first early star appearing like a small promise, the world holding them, as the world holds you now, without asking anything except that you rest.